I,
Uh,
what is that a temple? Zoom in on that. Well, sorry, we're being shown a.
from chat?
Okay,
Okay,
so
all right. This is the okay. We have been told that there's a T1 issue with
it
the
says
temple.
temple shenanigans T1 issue after interview
So apparently, yeah, we've been whispered in
in
the air.
capital letters.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the message we just.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, yeah. We'll look into that right after
It
this.
was just when
Trust
you
me,
brought up that your Christmas was ruined, I was like, there's something
Yeah.
you should know.
Okay.
I have no more. No, that's got a bit crazy. I have the amount of joy I can get out of just going and obliterating the temple right now. Trust me, and I don't care if it's a mid-league nerf. I've lost all sympathy for that bloody
Okay.
temple and everyone running it
Okay.
for
Sure.
now. Being extreme, like obviously I don't want to actually just make it bad, but like
All right.
it's left some trauma.
Okay.
Flashback.
Here's an idea. Let's remove the lock medallion from the game. What would that do? Well, we'd have to completely restructure how we approach the temple. I'll tell you one thing it would do. It would reduce the amount of loot you get from your temples by a lot, because there'd be no way to stop a whole bunch of runes being destabilized.
End of flashback.
What up, guys? Snoo here. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts leading up to now with the current state of the temple and the different iterations of nerfs that we've undergone so far, as well as give you my current up-to-date temple layout. Yes, I'm still playing it. I'm the last content creator who's still trying to juice the temple up for raw loot, or at least I think I am. Probably not, but yeah, most people have written this mechanic off by now. And I don't think you should. Not necessarily. What you see in the background is footage of the current up-to-date temple footage taken today. It is not a complete temple. In fact, I would go so far as to say there is no such thing as a complete temple anymore on account of the recent nail in the coffin nerf, the removal of the lock medallion, aside from Assyrian, the architect, which you wouldn't normally do. But yes, let's first begin with my thoughts. It's not all positive, not all negative, a bit of a mixed bag. I definitely have some criticisms for the developers, how they've handled things. In particular, the initial patch notes for the launch of the league. I thought it was a really awful change, what they started out with. Then it got progressively better. Finally, with the most recent edition, my favorite. I know it's hard to believe, my favorite. Well, I mean, heck, I did suggest it on a list of 10 possible suggestions to fix or nerf the temple. It was the 10th and final one, the one that I thought was least likely to occur, and the one that I thought would be the, most difficult to stomach for the player base. Kind of surprised they went with this one, but hey, if they really want to nerf the temple, that is definitely one way to do it. Okay, let's begin with the worst part of all. The initial launch, Fate of the Vaal, moving to core in 0.5. I assumed it would be. I mean, there's no way they put that much work into a mechanic, right? I mean, I know they kind of flubbed it up with the craziness of how much loot it was spitting out, but geez, you would think that they would feel a little more proud about how it's going. Anyway, we're getting a little ahead of myself. Let's look at this change right here. So we learned in the initial reveal from Jonathan, as well as later from Mark, that basically the sentiment of the developers is that they really don't want players to be using the snaking strategy. That's where you just put like one long snake of rooms and basically you hold it there and you manipulate the loot upwards and you make it easy on yourself to keep the temple alive and full by locking down the final room in the chain, and that's how it works in case you weren't aware. Well, Jonathan came out in the reveal in the Ziggy D interview saying, I mean, basically, I'm paraphrasing, snaking is dead. You can't do it anymore. And I don't even really need to tell you that. It literally just says it in the patch notes. I think he was just kind of reading the patch notes and then went to the, the interview and remembered that line, was like, yes, we got him. We got him. It is no longer possible to prevent a room being deleted from the temple Rooms that must be deleted but have other connections will be turned into simple path rooms. This prevents the snake strategy, as he declared. And I'm putting an emphasis on this declaration part because this is where the worst of it really is. We got to see in the reveal what this looked like, just a little snippet. And so there was speculation on what the workaround might be for that. We figured, Spy Masters, you may not be able to have more than one. Turned out to be true. We figured Alchemy Lab Tier 3, Corruption Chamber Tier 3, Sacrificial Room Tier 3, might not be able to pick up the currencies from there to interface with that to get the reward. Otherwise, it would delete the room. Turned out to be true. I did a little bit of controlled demolitions in the beginning to see all these things for myself. I went way above and beyond what normal players would normally do to check these things. And so if you were an unsuspecting player who played in the temple last league or kind of heard about it or whatever and stepped in this time, you got a really rude awakening with this change. Even if you saw the reveal, it might not have really sank in with all the ramifications of it. And so I feel like this was an incredibly unintuitive solution. It wouldn't have even made the list of top 30 if I had one for possible changes. And it didn't get to the heart of the problem whatsoever because it would turn out that players were still snaking afterwards. All you had to do is just make sure that you locked down your room like you normally do. What do you mean locked down? Didn't they delete Spy Masters? No, we still have one. We still have other rooms too that give lock medallions. And when you build out a temple big enough, you start unlocking a lot of those rooms. Smithies, Tier 3, the couple of Legionnaires, garrisons, or even the Sacrificial Chamber does. There might even be something else that I'm forgetting, but those rooms still dropped one. And so if you just do one single snake chain, the chances of getting a lock medallion not that low. And so you might have a little bit of a tug of war with the game, but for the most part, you would be able to just about fully complete a temple. And I was kind of close to being there when all this went down, the most recent one. But this is what we launched with. And yeah, between the fact that it was really upsetting for the players who were, accidentally deleting their own temples. Like, for example, if you set up a snake chain and then turned it around and overlapped it with an adjacent chain, and then you didn't quite lock enough rooms, didn't have enough rooms on standby, you had to make sure you had 10% of your rooms that were available to be destabilized while locking down your chain. And you at some point actually had to count the rooms that you had in the temple to make sure you were playing it safe. And then if you messed it up or didn't know any better, it would just randomly turn one of your rooms into a path. If it was connected to an adjacent room, it would do a massive loop suddenly out of nowhere. And it was just a god-awful change. I mean, on its face, a terrible change. Not the right approach at all. So obviously I criticize the choice of the change. But most of all, this prevents a snake strategy. No, it didn't. It totally didn't. It made it a little more annoying. It made it so that you had to be more cautious about it. If anything, it had the opposite effect. It meant that only players who were really all about building the temple, the top-end players who were extra careful, extra diligent about it, only they could pull it off and execute it. And that's even worse, in my opinion, because then you're shutting the door on, the more regular type of players. Not what you want, obviously. But the worst part of all is that it speaks to a certain ignorance about what they were doing. I'm not sure if the developers even played the temple at a super high level, anything remotely like what I did, or several other players for that matter. Because if there was anybody in the room who was talking about changing the temple, if the goal was to make snaking not a thing, then this ain't it. I mean, it should have been obvious to anybody. When I read these notes, I just turned around and said, well, guys, it looks like we're still on with the temple. I mean, they say it's snake's dead, but I don't see why they're saying that, because it looks like there'll be plenty of workarounds. And so I was very disappointed, both in this particular change. The rest of the changes we're not going through here to save time in the video. They look fine. I mean, a lot of little things, little tinkering around the edges, all good. But this one here, between the change itself and how unintuitive it is, as well as the arrogance to assume that it's going to remove the snaking strategy, just being dead wrong about it. I think very highly of the developers. So I set a high bar for that. If they're going to use a word like prevents, guys, that doesn't say this dissuades this disencourages, that says this prevents it. That means they want it dead. And they think that this makes it dead. So to be completely dead wrong about that assertion, that doesn't look good, doesn't speak well to their choice to make this change. But anyway, this is the worst of it. It gets a lot better from here. And fortunately, where we're at currently in the game is a much better place. And now we fast forward to hotfix 13, 0.5.0b. This one was dedicated to the temple. It occurred about a week into 0.5, and this one's dedicated to nerfing the temple, as well as fixing some of the calculations. Maybe they're kind of alluding that there was a bug or a severe miscalculation in how much loot was supposed to be dropping based on the new Atlas passive points for temple, which is ironically buffed it like crazy. So then they had to do even more nerfing, and I don't know how they get all this stuff wrong in such a massive way, but I hadn't even begun messing with the temple yet, so I couldn't really see it for myself. But if this line is true, where they said every single pack is spawning rare, then okay, like, that wasn't even true last league. So I have some sense of what that would do to the loot. Good, they are addressing that, or had addressed that, great. And then there are some other things they did, which are kind of in alignment with one of the other suggestions that I gave back in that February video, which was, let's reduce the compounding effect of those rooms buffing other rooms, like the Golem Works, like the Legion Barracks, like the Spy Masters, buffing the other rooms. They go from tier 1 to 2 to 3, and they get like even more numbers. What if we just reduce the maximum tier to 2? Then the number would be naturally less, and maybe even lowered on top of that. And that would save some headache for the lower end players who maybe find it a little bit tough to upgrade rooms all the way to 3. And so it wouldn't really be any harsher for them, because it's always nice when you make a change that is, well, assuming that there's an issue with what's going on at the super top end, which there was here, let's try to dampen down what the top end players are doing without negatively impacting the lower end players, of course. But they take like this reverse view, I guess, where they're going to add a tier, go from tier 3 to tier 4, but then make it even a harsher penalty on the room numbers. They're just reducing the compounding effect more so. They made it so the difference between 2 and 3 is bigger than the difference between 3 and 4, and so it's, I don't know, the scaling's kind of weird on it. Anyway, on principle, this change is a good one, and like I said, kind of in alignment with another suggestion that I had. So happy to see that. Then they also made destabilization a little harsher. I didn't suggest that at all, but I like this change only in the context of a temple that doesn't allow you to lock it down easily, because otherwise it doesn't make any difference. You know, if you're able to lock it down, always, who cares whether the destabilization is good or bad? If anything, that's just harming the lower end player more. But this was really just to offset the buffs from the brand new Atlas passive tree, which buffed the temple even more, to actually give it even more of a boost going into the next league. Well, I suppose I had to, so can't really speak to that. But there's a lot of changes here on the list. Those are the two big ones. And this destabilization change is going to be a trend line moving forward. Because here we go. You saw this one in the intro of the video. Hotfix 8, 0.5.1. Well, there's only a couple things that matter here, aren't there? Because this is not dedicated to temple. We have the removal of the lock medallion. Actually, first let me talk about the reduced destabilization reduction rate. This was going even further. Okay, this is now gone beyond the sort of typical 10% destabilization of the room, or 30% if you killed the architect or its Siri. Now it's somewhere around the 12% or 36% respectively. And so it is truly harsher than it ever was before. And then on top of that, they removed the lock medallion per my most controversial suggestion from back in February. I can't believe they actually did this. So my preferred fix, not even really preferred, what I feel like was the best solution that everyone I ever talked to agreed with, because it negatively impacted the fewest number of people, would have been to simply reduce the size of the temple. The temple is a 9x9 square. You could make it 8x8 or 7x7, or hell, even 6x6 or 5x5. Go crazy. I don't know. Well, maybe that's a little too much, but that would have just solved so many problems at once. It wouldn't have technically solve the snaking problem, but as far as the outrageous, outlandish scalability of the temple, would have gone a long way. Would have made things so much easier for them, and it would have been almost entirely frictionless change on the part of the developers. I would think. So I was surprised to see that they didn't do that. It was such an obvious change. But this was perhaps my second favorite one. I left it at number 10 because I knew it would be controversial, but I like this change a lot because it is, unlike the change in 0.5 initially, this one's highly intuitive based on how the mechanic itself works. The mechanic was never destined to be this thing that you complete. It's supposed to be this sort of ongoing struggle where you're building rooms and then, you know, you're fighting, you're playing tug of war with the game itself, or you're trying to go out to sea and the tide keeps pushing you back in, and sometimes you get a little further out and things are really nice, and sometimes you get pushed back in really far and things are kind of rough, and you know, you just play that constant tug of war, a ceiling that can never be reached. It's truly a unique mechanic in PoE, unlike just about everything else that has like a set investment cost and there's always a top end maxed out way to play it, and there's an obvious wall there and you can't go beyond that. And that's fine, but we got so many other mechanics that are like that already. Why not have one like this where the sky is the limit, but you'll never reach it? And to me, that's just so compelling. In fact, I enjoyed building a temple more than I enjoyed playing it last league, believe it or not, because it's so enthralling, that process of, you know, trying to get there, trying to get as far as you can. So I'm happy to see this change. It, as I suggested back then, has some major ramifications for how to go about constructing a temple, and therefore I had to completely revisit my own layout, which I unfortunately was doing quite well on prior to this change. But that's okay. I managed to do the funky loop and save half my temple and make it work. So this is where we're at. Was really disappointed with the initial approach to the temple. Not so disappointed with their attitude about snaking. I don't really care about that. Obviously, I am disappointed with Mark's disdain for the temple, but I feel like they brought it on themselves a little bit here by taking such a half-assed approach to seriously solving the temple issues and to come out with solutions that don't even address the underlying problem based on their own assertion of what they want the temple to be. Very let down in the beginning, but here we are seeing a major turnaround now, and this is the best of it that we've seen so far. They still need more work on it. There's still probably something wrong with the numbers. A lot of people are checked out of the temple now. I get that, but it's going to be something that's core to the game, and I think it is, at least by a design standpoint, the best league mechanic Path of Exile has ever seen. When you think about it and all the potential that it has, all the different directions it could take, it could be one of the worst, obviously, but it definitely could be one of the best. All right, so we bring in game so you can see what I'm working with, and this looks to a certain extent about what you saw in that footage. I've actually changed some priority here in the snakes, but we're not done snaking, guys. It's just a 3-headed snake now, and it's set in a spiral pattern. So before, the layout was one giant snake that went around the outsides, swung around this way, and then looped back in through the center, creating effectively 3 chains, but it was all connected to one. Now it's 3 individual chains just going all the way around, and it's very simple like that. And it would end somewhere over here. You can see I got kind of the SimCity thing going on here where these rooms and paths are meant to be destabilization fodder. And if you do this enough, you kind of understand how the game prioritizes destabilizations. It's a bit of a high-level thing, which we might talk about in a future video. But anyway, the idea here is a commander and barracks chain that goes all the way along the outside. Then we have an initial spy master into alchemy lab thaumaturgy chain all the way here on the inside. And then there's just kind of a mishmash of things. We get the sacrificial chamber, the corruption chambers. And then up here, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do. Maybe like a Golem Works or Synth Flesh Lab or something like that. And it can kind of wind back in towards the Architect a little bit. Architect in the same position as before. But nothing will ever get, you know, too far in deep, and you won't be able to because there'll be too much destabilization going on. What I really like about this setup, and you can see it for yourself in the description of the video, the core setup, I've managed to figure out a way to, well, get way more power out of a lesser number of rooms, for one thing. That's one of the advantages of this. For example, if you start with one snake chain, you are going to start with a corruption chamber or a generator. And if you're lucky, you might sometimes have a golem works that's highly vulnerable. Here we got 2 locked in tier 3 golem works on top of a generator. That's a huge boost to the loot overall, as well as some really great medallion options, by the way. The reroll medallion, stuff that's really good there. We can only do 1 spy master now. The biggest hurt to only 1 spy master was obviously it would be the lack of locks, but now it's really about the lack of increased rare monsters. So I've deliberately put a hole in here where you can sneak in a 3rd Elite Legion, and under normal circumstances these are actually downward here, not there. In which case all 3 Elite Legions would be connected to adjacent rooms, getting all the bonuses there, and you would have at all times either 2 or 3 potentially. So it's pretty tough to figure out how to sneak that in without causing problems with the overall layout, but you can see you could put another garrison right here and it would connect to the spy master and it would be active during that round. And so now we maintain the temple by just constantly plugging rooms back in that we lose. That's not a bad way to approach that. Then on this side we have a similar thing. So if you imagine this corruption chamber down here, or you can imagine it up here, it doesn't matter, then I can put another one here. So this is the 2 most valuable rooms in the temple, corruption chamber and now Legion barracks. Legion barracks being the most valuable. So we now have an opportunity to throw both of those rooms down in a very safe, maximizing value place. Another Legion barracks instantly turned to tier 3, and then a corruption chamber instantly turned into tier 3 if it's placed right here between these 2 rooms. So that's really awesome, and I like that a lot. Another reason why I had the rooms be as such where they're just kind of being the same thing throughout the whole chain is because you never know when the chain you might start losing one chain massively. And so it's okay because you're losing some valuable room, but you still got a lot of the same type of rooms going on. And so that's fine. Another reason why it's good set up this way where the rooms are different is because one of the advantages to running 3 snakes instead of 1 is that it's easier to set up initially. When you're looking for rooms to build the temple, you're not just looking for 1 room at a time. You're looking for 3 different rooms at a time. Different rooms, not necessarily the same ones. Sometimes they might be the same ones if they're timed up like this, but you can see that it's mostly different room types for each chain. And so that allows you to build it up faster, and it allows you to sustain it easier because you're less likely to have to waste an entire sleeve of room cards, if you know what I mean. Plus, you're also putting your paths over here and other random rooms. So very likely to make use of most rooms that show up one way or another. And so that's the layout in a nutshell. Again, you can check out the description to see it a little more like hypothetically complete, but don't expect to get it like fully done. I'm expecting to be able to fill this temple up to about 3/4, maybe a little more, before reaching an absolute like top end point. 80% is probably like the literal top end. And I don't know exactly how much loot's going to drop, but I'm anxious to find out. But we got to get there first, so still got to do some more farming. But anyway, that is the layout that I'm working on, and I'm really excited to try it out. I had actually already theory crafted this before, but you know, that was in an era of 1 or 2 snake chains only, and 3 was too hard to handle or something, I guess, because we wouldn't have enough locks to lock it down, which was true. But now we get to play with the 3 snake setup, and I didn't really have it be this smooth and this simple. That's why I'm not even showing you in the template. I'm just showing you here with what I have because it's just so simple. You just build them all out at the same time at whatever rate you can, and yeah, it should be relatively easy to do. So there you go, guys. That is the video on initially my thoughts and the most recent changes to the temple, just nerf after nerf after nerf, which I do believe is called for by and large, just so long as how they handle it. I wanted to give you guys my opinion on it, and especially if you're somebody who's kind of despairing about it, you love the temple mechanic, you think it's kind of a lost cause right now. I don't think there's a reason to think it's a lost cause. It's a good opportunity to try some other mechanics, try them out, see how it goes. That way you can get a baseline, if anything, if you want to revisit it again, I still think this mechanic in its current state has a lot to offer, and I don't foresee them doing any more major nerfs to it. They probably feel like they've hit the nail in the coffin. But you know me, I thrive in these times. I love it when things are down bad and we can still make it work, still turn a few heads. I think that's where we're at, guys. So that's my layout as it currently is. You can see this was actually my layout that I had for a hot second there. It was a little bit nicer, fleshed out, but I've been messing around, changing a few things here and there. So that's what we're working with. That's the kind of loot you can expect from what you saw. That's the performance of the build that we've been running. Didn't even talk about the build. But yeah, a lot more to come. A lot more temple videos to come. Next up, we'll probably look at some crafting videos for the build, actually. So I got to get something like that out soon. But that's it for now. And if you guys want to voice your opinion on what you think about the temple, by all means, share. Just try to keep it cordial if you can. And I'd love to hear from you guys. So otherwise, we'll see you on stream. See you in the comments. And thank you for watching.